You ready to rock?
I am, yes. Can you hear
Oh,
me okay?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay.
Excellent. Three, two, one. Hello, my friends. Thank you for joining me today. Boy, you have a lot of choices out there, but you chose to watch this show today, and I certainly do appreciate it. I'm having a conversation with Ophelia Madsen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I found you on Twitter. I found you to be an interesting person, and we've had some interesting interactions, and we run in similar circles, commenting on some of the people. We have similar, we're fans of some people, not so much fans of other people, and our boundaries have crossed, and that's kind of cool. So I thought you'd be a great guest for the show.
Thank you.
In our little chit chat, we're going to be all over the place. There's really no agenda here. I'm not going to do a who's that guy that does the inside the actor studio? Uh,
Oh,
Is his name James Lipton, or am I thinking of something? He's got the blue cards with all the questions on it, and it's almost robotic, you know. And I'm not going to do that. We're just going to do kind of stream of consciousness and talk about whatever we want. But when we originally chatted, you are quite the handy woman. You
oh,
had fire in your house, and you had to get your act together. Fires are devastating.
yes,
Tell me
it's
about
true.
the process and tell me about your involvement in it.
Well, I've always been pretty handy. Um, I've always kind of liked building things. My grandfather is a huge handyman. He built his own house like 65 years ago, probably longer actually. But so I come from a family of handy people, so it's kind of in my blood. But yeah, when we had our fire, it when we contracted somebody to help we had to have the whole house gutted from the inside. They couldn't tear it down because the age of the house and the construction of it would have been just too astronomically expensive to do that. But they had to gut the inside, and then rebuild the whole thing because smoke damaged everything inside. So when we contracted the contractor to do all of that, my husband actually had to seriously convince me that because I had a list of things. So, well, we won't have him do that. I'll do it. And he's like, you can't do everything. So for me to delegate to someone else, so it was a little bit difficult. As it turns out, the contractor ended up being a bit of a jerk, and he walked out partway through the job. So we'd had the tear out done. We had the framing finished, and it was at the insulation stage right before drywall when he walked away. So by that time, we'd been out of our house for almost 2 years, and we were rapidly running out of money to pay for the place where we were staying. So I had to very quickly take over and kind of manage getting it at least at a finished stage where we could move in and bring our kids back, because we couldn't afford to keep staying out. So I took a few weeks off work, came in and put down all the flooring. So I did tile, did the wood flooring. I contracted out the drywall because I can do drywall, but I really hate doing drywall. So we got it in a pretty good state. It's mostly finished now. It's almost all just trim work left to do now. I do all that myself. So most of what I've put up on Twitter has been trimming up some of the rooms, but also completely redoing my staircase, which is a thing that I'm almost kind of famous for now. I have people that message me say, "Oh, you're the staircase lady." So
Yeah.
yeah, that one left an impression.
What does having a fire in your house do to a marriage? Now, you and your husband been together for 14 or more years, and then you have something like this. And you know, by the time you're an adult, you've been through things before. I'm assuming you never had a fire in your house before.
No,
What
no.
does this do to a relationship, to a marriage? What did it do to the dynamics between you and your husband? It's not like having a flat tire. Honey,
Yeah,
the car broke down today. It is a major life-changing event
yeah.
that put you outside your home.
Hmm. It was for us. Most of the stress was on me, right? Like I don't handle stress as well as he does. He's very stoic, right? So for him, it was stressful for him because he has his routine. He likes things very the same all the time. So for him to be displaced was a struggle for him, but he doesn't externalize any of that, right? So he's pretty good at kind of handling it on his own. He just needs to make sure that I don't freak out, because for me, like I had the stress of not just the being out of the house, but managing. We still had a ton of our kids living with us at the time. We have 6 kids, but at the time we had 4 still living with us, and having to manage all of their things while also being out of the house was mostly my job, and that was very stressful for me. To be honest though, the biggest stressor for both of us was how it stressed out our kids, right? Because they lost almost everything they owned.
Mm.
And a couple of them are very, what do you call it, uh, emotional about their things, right? They get attached to things quite a bit. Some kids are fine with, oh well, I'll just get new stuff, but we have a couple that are pretty sentimental. So it was very hard on them, and having them displaced and having to organize new ways to school, and it was just it was pretty devastating. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, for sure. It was a very stressful time. Um, just having to try to keep everybody, trying to make everything as normal as you can
Hmm.
in a situation like that. It's very difficult. And then also on the outside of all of that, managing the stressors of dealing with an insurance company that doesn't really want to, they don't want to pay on a policy. So there's always that stressor. And then also having to organize the rebuild while you're still managing your existing life. Like, it was a Herculean task, to say the least. So it was stressful, but I'm glad I did it with him. If anybody else, and it probably would have destroyed our marriage. I can see how it could destroy people's marriage, because there's so much stress there, and you get taken out of your space, right? And that will often bring out the things that destroy relationships, right? It
Yeah.
puts extra stress on all those little things that you normally can set aside, and they become overwhelming. So
Mhm.
he's he's a pretty big rock for me. So that's what
That's
worked. I'm organized and he's the rock.
that's consistent with what I've taught for years. When I teach men to be the rock in the relationship, don't let her be the rock, because if she is the rock, she will eventually become resentful if she has to be the strong one.
It's true. I'm pretty strong, right? Like, we've always kind of likened our relationship to, I'm the shield maiden type, right? Like,
Mhm.
he's not the stand behind me, honey, and I'll protect you. It's never going to be that way. I'm usually going to be the one at the front throwing all the punches, right? He's the one that stands there and says, "No, honey, we don't have to fight this time," right? So he picks the battles. But it's true though. I need somebody super strong to 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 manage me, right? Because I am that independent and kind of fierce. So, and he's all of that. He doesn't it's deceptive, because he's so easygoing. So everybody who meets my husband loves my husband, right? Because he's just a genuinely nice guy. Um, but yeah, he is that rock, which is what's good, because anything less than I would just become, I could be a freight train. So yeah.
So you found somebody who was a rock.
Hmm.
Was that something that emerged in your marriage, or was he like that when you first met him?
No, he's always been exactly the same. He's always been that way. He's just that way. I always make jokes that he was born an 80-year-old man, right? Because he just has this inner wisdom and kind of serenity all the
Yeah.
time. And we've been through some really huge challenges. Some things. My mother, she often complains, because she's like, "You guys make me sick," because we're always really kind of lovey-dovey, and we're very affectionate. Um,
After after 14 years, you're
yeah,
still affectionate.
yeah.
That's
She's always like, "When are you guys gonna quit?" And he's always like, "I'm never quitting doing this. Are you kidding?" We are. It is like being in the honeymoon phase, and the first few years, my mom used to make jokes like that about, well, kind of comments like that about, "Oh, you're just still in the honeymoon phase," but he always said the first 5 years of our time together were so stressful with so many huge challenges that it was like the same amount of stress as a 30-year marriage, right? Like we had two very bitter divorces with some very ugly exes, right? And melding a household with, he had 3 kids and I had 3 kids, and trying to mesh a household of 6 children, like a real one, not these are my kids and these are your kids, right? Like we always wanted to make sure we were a very tightly integrated family. So all of the challenges of that, plus everything else, work and building a house and whatnot, it was a lot. It's a miracle that we're still as affectionate as we are.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. How much of an age difference between you guys?
He's 2 years older than me,
Okay.
so it's not a lot, right? It's not a lot, but yeah,
So
he's older up here.
his rockness, that stoicism, is not because he's a much older man. It's
Yeah.
part of who he is.
Yeah, he's always been that way. He tells me stories sometimes, like when he went to he was never the kid that got in trouble, right? He was always the top of the class. All the teachers always liked him. He got like the principal's award in high school, nominated by his teachers, right? Like he was always just a good person. He's only once ever in his life been drunk. And he said, no, I did it and I didn't enjoy it. He doesn't like being out of control of himself, right? So he's that guy, right? Like he likes just putting on a record, laying down with a book, relaxing. He just likes having his own space. He's a little bit, I always make jokes that he's a little bit Asperger's-y, right? He might have a touch of it, right? Like he's that way. He's just very the same all the time.
Somewhere else without going somewhere else.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he's just always been that way though, right? Like even as a kid, his mother makes comments sometimes about how she never had to worry about if he said he was going somewhere, she never had to worry about what he was up to, ever.
That's great.
He never seeks trouble. I don't know what he's doing with me.
He's the rock. He brings something out of you and provides something for you that no one else has.
Yeah.
And that's in his personality.
Mm-hmm.
What does he have to deal with you?
My temper. And that's gotten significantly better over the years, but I've always had a really hot temper. So
Mhm.
that's hard for him to deal with sometimes. And it's not, not even always with him, just in general. I can go on a rant sometimes, and he'll find that sometimes stressful, and he'll say, I can't listen to you venting like that. I vent, right? Like I'm an external person. So that's sometimes hard for him to deal with. I've been trying to rein that back because it sets him off keel a little. And I don't want to do that to him just for the sake of venting my own, right? So that's probably the biggest thing he has to deal with. For the most part, I manage myself. And like I said, really independent. I always have a list of things I like to get done, right? Like stuff gets done in my house. I'm very organized. And he never has to worry about, right? Like I'm not the type that's I'm gonna go off for a girls' weekend and drink and hire strippers or something, right? Like he never has to worry about stuff like that. So mostly my temper is the thing that he has to worry about the most, right?
Mhm.
And that's not a huge thing either, right? Like he's calming. He calms me, so it doesn't tend to come out the way it used to, for sure. So, but that's probably the biggest thing if I asked him, that's probably what he would say.
What do you have to deal with about him? Let's make that door go in the other direction now.
Oh, you're gonna get me in trouble. Let me think. His assertiveness, right? Like that's the leading thing, right? Like, because I like for him to lead, right? But he's so easygoing sometimes that's difficult for him, and also because I'm so independent, he doesn't always like trying to resist me, right? Yeah. So, and because for him it's like, oh, I'll do whatever. But sometimes I get frustrated with that part, like a little more decisiveness. That's probably the thing that we have conversations about the most. But for him, it's mostly like, I'm just I'm happy doing whatever you want to do, because he's just that kind of person. So that's probably the only thing. I mean, otherwise, for me, the number one criteria for a person to be with me is honesty. And he has that in spades, right? He has honesty and dignity. So those things, as long as he's not sleeping around, everything else is secondary to that, right? Like that's the biggest thing for me. But
So you might need to step down the temper a little bit. He needs to step up the decisiveness a little bit. But the good thing is, you said you've talked about it. This is you've had conversations about this. This is not like some secret little gripe session that you're having about him, and he's not off somewhere bitching and moaning about you. You guys have talked
no.
about this.
Oh yeah, all the time. Well, not all the time. I shouldn't say that. It's not that big a
Well,
problem, but
it's been on the table. It's an issue that's on the table that you're
yeah.
not avoiding.
No, no, no. And like I'm the type of person that if there's an issue, like I don't let things simmer ever, and I don't hold grudges. So for me, if there's a problem, I'll grab that thing and I'll wrestle it to the ground, right? Like I won't let it go until it's resolved. So you can't really be in a relationship with me without hearing if there's an issue, and we're going to have to talk about it.
Yeah,
So I mean, for him, he'll happily talk to me if there's an issue. He's only the only times he ever brings up my temper or whatever is if I ask him if there's a problem, right? Like he's not the type that's going to bitch at me about it, right? Like he'll keep that to himself unless it becomes a huge problem. But for the most part, it doesn't, right? He's, like I said, he's really the most easygoing guy. He's really fabulous, actually. It's just it's good because too much challenge and that temper comes out, right? Like
yeah,
yeah, I'm better at reining it in these days, but yeah, it would be good if it didn't get poked too hard. So it's kind of good that he keeps it to himself until it's a big problem, and then he'll deal with
it,
it.
it sounds like there's a healthy polarity between both of you.
Hmm.
You are different enough to kind of keep each other on your toes, and that's one of the positive things about the marriage.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before because on Twitter I'm so into the interpersonal relationships and the male and female dynamic stuff, right? So we've had lots of conversations about all of that. And one of the things that we've kind of said is for me, he brings serenity, and for him, I bring the passion, right? Like he doesn't really have a lot of that, but he loves it. It's the thing that attracted him to me was he calls it my incandescence, which isn't just my hair right now, but
Yeah.
yeah. So he looks for that, and he gets that from me, and I get the serenity that I need, right? Like he's my calming force. So it is a really good polarity between the two of us. It works very well generally.
I had a conversation with Jennifer Molesky
Hmm.
yesterday. We talked about how many times women can soothe the savage beast. It sounds like he soothes your savage beast.
Yeah, I hope that's not unflattering for him. But yeah, that's probably true.
Well, I think different personalities work together well. I mean, you're kind of a yin and yang
Hmm.
couple. You're not uh he's not the female version of you. You're not the, you know, or the male version. Well, you know what I'm trying to say. It's
Yeah,
like
I do.
what you're not doing is you didn't come together because you're so alike. You guys
No.
have very clearly different styles, personalities, temperaments, but you made it work.
Yeah, the thing is, we have a couple of very aligned core values, the really important ones, right? So honesty, um, it's just being good people is the biggest thing. Family and decency are the two things that, for me, were always the most important, and they seem to be the most important thing to him too. Once we had those two together, like how we manage the rest of how we manage those core functions varies greatly. But um, once you have those two things, it's the core values that really matter. If those things are aligned, you can be wildly different personalities, and it actually kind of just adds a little bit of spice to the whole thing,
Yeah.
right? Because well, especially for our kids, they get exposure to two different kinds of ways to deal with things. But that's the thing that matters the most. So I couldn't dare live with somebody that was like me, right? Like part of the problem, my dad and I haven't always had a really good relationship. It's often been very stressed, and I'm convinced it's because we're so much alike, right? Like
Hmm.
for him, having me in the house was always like living with himself, right? But when you live with somebody who's just like you end up mostly living with the things about you that you don't like, right? And it just kind of it creates those stresses, right? So I couldn't live with somebody like me. It would be chaos, right? So the yin and yang is the thing that makes it work, but that they both revolve around a central space, right? So
So similar values, but different personalities. That seems
mhm.
like that's what you're talking about.
No, absolutely, yeah, we're definitely different personalities.
As I have observed you, you both are healthy looking middle-aged people in a world of unhealthy middle-aged people.
Hmm.
How do you guys stay so young and vital and attractive? What It's certainly not an accident.
Mm, I don't like to think so. I work pretty hard at mine, right? Like I've always been generally kind of fit. I'm really super active. We do a lot of outside stuff. We love hiking, like, but not just trail walks, right? Like we do almost mountain climbing kind of hiking. So we love stuff like that. A lot of outdoor stuff. So that helps. But the last few years, I've kind of organized our diet into I started with keto and then moved into carnivore. Still kind of keto too, right? But mostly carnivore. Uh, he came along for that because there's a lot of health benefits to it. But for me, I was struggling a lot with I had a ton of gut problems, and to the point where, and I love to eat. Like I love to eat. So I got to the stage where a lot of my gut problems, every time I had something to eat, I would be in agony, right? Like I'd have terrible bloating and a lot of pain, and it turned one of my favorite things into something that was terrible. So I decided, oh, I got to make a change. I got to do something. So I actually came across one of Gary Taubes's books, which is called Why We Get Fat, and I read that, and it totally transformed my thinking about.
I never
Pardon me.
I never heard of that book. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, Why We Get Fat. It's called. Gary Taubes he's on Twitter too, but he wrote. I think he's the Wheat Belly guy. I think he's the Wheat Belly guy. But anyway, totally transformed my thinking about the way food works in your body. And I started paying attention to, like, I used to think that the only thing I had to worry about was getting fat, but my metabolism's always been super high. So I was a junk food junkie. I would eat tons of crap and I would never get fat. So I was like, as long as I'm not getting fat, I don't have to worry.
Yeah, yeah,
That's not the case though, because I was deeply unhealthy and it was starting to
yeah.
show every time I put food in my mouth. So yeah, it's as soon as I started implementing some changes using the principles that I learned in that book and some other, like I did a ton of research after that too. I started noticing serious changes in the way that my body was reacting to the things I was eating, and that sort of set me down the path. Uh, it's worked out pretty good actually. I've had a lot of changes. My hair, my skin is better. Um, Part of the reason too is I work nights, like I work 12-hour night shifts, and
Yeah.
that's super hard on your body. Like I've done it for 8 years. The first couple of years were a huge struggle because managing a household with 6 kids and also working nights, like I was walking around like a zombie for weeks
Is
sometimes.
that like a 7 to 7 kind of thing,
Five
or
to five.
5 to 5? Okay. Hmm.
Yeah. So like that was really challenging on my body. It's next to impossible to get good sleep. So between that and a crappy diet, I was
Oh yeah.
becoming a real mess, right? Like just even mentally and physically, all of it. It was a huge struggle. So once I started altering our diet, I noticed I slept better during the day. I felt I could manage my night shift better without like 12 coffees. And so it was a huge game changer for me, and for him it's just healthier, right? Like he's always been generally healthy anyway. So we do a bunch of exercise. I do a bunch of exercise, but and he's started doing some now too. We both really want to be around for grandkids, so
Yeah. And that begins now.
hopefully soon.
Yeah. I mean, as far as like your health is concerned, it's not like you're not waiting to fall apart before you do something about your health. You
Yeah.
know, it's I've always said that how you feel now really is the result of what you've done for the past 10 years.
Mm. It's true.
So,
And I gotta say, I'm probably in better shape now than I've ever been. Like even my early 20s, right? Like
mhm,
I think I'm in better shape now. I'm certainly stronger, right? Like
mhm,
I've always been a bit of a weakling. But I'm
mhm.
stronger now than I used to be, which is good because I like to do a lot of heavy lifting, so
Yeah.
that works out.
Oh, that's great. All right. Speaking of early 20s
Mm.
and interesting jobs that you've had,
You don't mean the Tim Hortons?
it how can I put this? You had an interesting job when you were younger,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
you told me that some people might remind everyone that you have had this job.
Yeah.
Now, I have a very good friend that I love dearly who had a similar job, and we've talked at length about it. And so I'm used to hearing about this kind of stuff. Tell my audience about that job.
So I was a stripper or pole dancer, peeler. It has many names, right? But that was basically it, right? I danced naked for money. So, uh, yeah, I guess I was 2021 when I started doing that. I just left my first husband. I had a very small child in tow that I had to provide for. My first husband was he was European and he kind of vanished when we broke up. He didn't stick around. I'll be honest, I'm not sure he was in the country legally by the time we broke up. So that might have had something to do with it. But so I had a small child to deal with, and I was also going to school. So I had to manage all of that and still come up with enough money for the rent because I've never been a person that believed in welfare. So I wasn't going to go on any kind of social assistance. I never did that. So it was my responsibility to take care of the bills. So I did what I had to do it. I didn't it's never been a big problem for me about being naked, right? Like I was always shy but never bashful. I don't know if that distinction makes sense, but like nudity was never a thing that bothered me. So it wasn't a huge leap to do that. It was just the leap was to believe to have enough confidence that someone else was interested in paying me for to see me naked, right? Like the confidence level was where I was lacking
Yeah.
significantly. But the money was easy and it was something that I was skilled to do. I didn't really prior to that all I'd ever done was worked in restaurants. So I didn't really and working as a prep cook in a restaurant doesn't pay rent and take care of a baby. So I needed to do something else that was going to get me more than that. So that's
Mhm.
basically what I did it for. I was at it for about a year and a half, and it got us through. It got me through school, and then I once I was finished school, I got a really good job, and I quit. So I have a lot of really good stories from those days. Though it's an interesting space. You meet a lot of really interesting people.
What is the psychology of the average strip club, or I guess do they call them gentlemen's clubs now or something? Uh,
Um, I don't know. It's always been a strip club for me. You could call it a gentleman's club, but you're kind of,
yeah,
it's like putting lipstick on a pig, right?
just really change it.
Well, there are gentlemen in those clubs, right? Despite what a lot of women think, that it is possible to find a gentleman in a strip club. Like I had quite a few regular customers who were very, very nice men, right? And
Yes.
for what they had their own reasons for why they were there, but they were always generally very courteous and right, like that's the kind of men that I gravitated towards. It's probably the reason that I wasn't a really big money maker in the strip club, but it wasn't generally about looks. And in a place like that, it's about what you're willing to do. So I didn't make a lot of money because I had a limit, right? We didn't do anything that was illegal. So there were no little jobs on the side for me. So I made less than a lot of the girls. And also because I was a little choosy. I didn't like creeps much, and I would gravitate more towards the men who acted like gentlemen. So it limited my score a little,
Yeah.
but it meant that my experience there didn't turn into like a heroin nightmare, right? Like
Right.
there is a lot to the stereotype that strippers will descend into kind of a life of degradation, because it can feel degrading what you're
Yeah.
doing. But if you tailor your experience a little more, then it really isn't that much. Like it was very rare that I felt that way about what I
Mhm.
was doing, and mostly because of the customers that I would choose to deal with. I turned down a few that I thought would make me feel that way. So it made my experience different, and it made me, the way I feel about it now, different too, right? Like it's not a secret to anybody. I've been very open about it before. All my kids know that's in my past too. That's never been a secret. Not that I would have been able to keep it a secret, because my husband's ex-wife has made a very big deal of making that public knowledge. So my kids would have found out about it anyway. But it's never been something that I've been ashamed of either, right? So I always looked at it as, well, if I'd been doing it on a runway for a fashion house, or if I'd been doing it on the cover of Vogue, we would all be thinking I was just this great celebrity, right? I
Yeah.
guess I kind of look at it the same way. It was
Yeah.
just more discounted.
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember, oh gosh, many years ago, many years ago, the polls came into being after, because I remember when I was a young man, when I went on occasion, there weren't polls on stages. And
Mhm.
then polls existed, and everything revolved literally around a pole.
It's true.
What role does that pole play? Is it a security blanket? Do you stray far from the pole and then come back to the pole? Does everything start and end at the pole?
um, the club that I spent the most time at had 3 poles at one end of the stage, and it had like 3 different levels of stage. So it was actually a really interesting stage to dance on, because you could do quite a bit with a space like that, right? There's always been clubs where it's just one flat stage with one pole in the middle, and that's always been kind of boring to me. I've always been a really enthusiastic dancer. So for me to have a really large stage with all these multiple levels and whatnot, I would just tear the whole place up. Um, that's just fun for me. But the poles, I don't think it's a security blanket thing. I think it serves 2 functions mostly. The first one, it serves as a way to break up the routine, so it makes it more interesting, right? Like just dancing by yourself in the middle of the stage with nothing, no props, can get boring, right? It's a 3-song set. You run out of things to do, right? So I think it tends to break up the routine a little, make it more interesting. But also, let's be honest, right? Like the pole is meant to simulate something, right?
Mhm.
That's meant to be stimulating for men, right? So the women that use the pole for that way uh, tend to be more popular, right? Like it's exhilarating for men to see a woman handle a pole.
Yeah.
Really, right? That's the way I think.
Were you the kind of person that came out with layers of clothing, and then almost like in a burlesque fashion, would different layers would come off? Or
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, I was always there were the girls that came out in bikinis, and they just sort of, I was always more dramatic than that. It was never like, I'm a huge fan of Dita Von Teese. We've actually gone to see her live show. She's the burlesque queen, right? Like I don't know if you're familiar with her, but if you're
No.
not, you really should. She's fabulous.
Okay.
But anyway, she does a huge burlesque show with the corsets and big feather boas, and like it's fabulous. It's really quite the show. But I was never that elaborate, just because those kinds of costumes were very expensive. But I always had that spirit, right? I wanted it to be a show. You have the strippers that go out there and they just sort of writhe around on the floor, right? but for me, it was always about putting on a show. So I always did it that way. There was definitely tease in the strip tease part for me, right? Like I always treated it like it was a business, right? I always treated it like a business. I'm not just going to go out there and expect that my naked breasts are all that you're going to need, right? You're there for something more. So I always put on a bit of a show.
Mhm.
I always tried to, at least, right? There were a time or two. Well, actually, I have a good pole story that you're going to enjoy, I think. I'd said that the stage was long and it had these 3 poles at the end, and I used to, for my first song, I'd have something that was fairly up tempo, and I used to almost gallop across the front of the stage, and I'd get a good run up to those poles, and I'd grab one and swing around really, really good. And one time I missed that pole, right? Like it's one step too far, and my hand missed the pole, and I flew right off the stage because I was up at a pretty good clip, right? I flew right off the stage and I landed on some poor bastard's table, and I actually broke the table. I felt awful. Like I had to buy him a new drink because his drink spilled everywhere. But he was more worried about me, right? Like I could
Yeah.
have really hurt myself.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. It's stuff like that, right? Like you can't get too impressed with yourself when you have
Right.
stuff like that happen to you. Stuff like that happens to me all the time. But yeah, that was a memorable time. I had to go home early that day because I was just so embarrassed from the whole thing. I had to leave because I needed some time to summon my courage again.
Did you have your own playlist, or did you leave it up to a DJ? Or
No, I always picked my songs.
Mm.
I wanted to pick because I was trying to put on a show. I wanted to pick stuff that would inspire me to that show. So I always picked my songs. Some of the girls would have the DJ just put on whatever, but I always picked my songs.
Was it rock and roll, hip hop, R&B? What was
Oh,
the what was the vibe?
it was a pretty good mix actually. It was early 90s. I think it was 95. So and I have pretty eclectic taste. So I had a really good Michael Jackson song that I loved dancing to, right? The Way You Make Me Feel, one of
Mhm.
my favorite first songs, right? Like I'd start with something up tempo first and then dial it down, and then the third song would always be something kind of slow and sensual. The Depeche Mode was on my list. I had The Cult on my list. Like Firewoman by The Cult was a great one to start with, right? It would always be really high energy to start, and then the third one would be something that was like I always had really sensual tastes for slow music too. So something that would inspire me to play the role, I guess, is the best way to say it. So it's pretty eclectic, yeah.
I have a funny feeling that a lot of people, after watching this conversation, are going to be looking up Depeche Mode, Michael Jackson, and the Cult just to see.
Well, I'll tell you, I put brand new connotations. Anybody who wants to look up Depeche Mode, it's Clean was my favorite song, and it was really quite ironic to end my set with that song. But
How
it's a
long is a
great
set?
song. 3 songs,
Okay,
so however long those are.
so that could be 12 to 15 minutes or something like that. 10
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah.
Hmm.
Usually between 10 and 12 minutes. So of solid dancing, it would be pretty. I'd be pretty sweaty by the end.
So you were on a rotation, and then when were you back on the stage
I'd
after
do
that?
1 or 2 sets a night for stage. Stage I didn't get paid for, right? Like they had for freelancers, you pay the club like a cover charge to come in. You get your money from table dances, and this you're obligated. Well, at least the club where I was, you were obligated to do 1 stage show a night. They didn't pay you for that though. That was you were in there. You had to put on at least one. If they didn't have enough girls, then they would do it as a rotation. If you were willing, you could do. I would always do more than one if I could because it's great advertising. I would always get most of my money for table dances after my stage show because that's where they get interested in you, right?
Yeah.
So, and then making whatever money I did from table dancing. There were girls that were paid to be there, but and they had to go on the stage on a regular rotation. I never wanted to do that. I wanted to be able to come and go as I please. So I chose just doing freelance work,
Mhm.
even though I had to pay to be in there. it was only like 10 or 12 bucks. It wasn't very much, right? And then after that, my night was for myself, and I could schedule my time as I wanted. So I preferred that.
Is there a correlation between how you look and how much you make? Or is it more about what you do and how much you make?
I think, at least in my experience, I noticed it's more about what you're willing to do. Because
Hmm.
there were plenty of ladies, not plenty. There was a couple of ladies in the club where I worked where um, I would have, and not to be overly immodest, but I would have considered them less attractive than me by quite a bit. And so, like one that was actually fairly heavy and not there's heavy in the curvy way, and then there's kind of just heavy like a big tree trunk. She wasn't very attractive, but she made a lot more money than I did. But, and I've had seen her do a few things that in the dark corners that I wasn't willing to do, and I suspect that's probably why. It's
Okay.
not always attractive, right? Like guys have their tastes. There's sometimes it's not even about whether they're good looking. It's about whether or not the girl looks like somebody that's. I mean, this is a fantasy, right? He's there for his fantasy, and sometimes it's not even if she's attractive. It's if she looks like somebody that he's enamored with, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. So he gets to live the fantasy a little with a girl that looks similar to the one that he covets. That's the way I interpret it a lot, right? Like I saw a lot of guys that went for girls that were kind of like, you could have done way better.
Yeah.
But yeah, everybody has their taste, and some guys go there to indulge in the thing that's different from what they have, right? Like there was plenty of married men there that were with women that were so radically different from their wives, and I'm sure it's just because of the novelty of it, right? So
Yeah.
no, it's a real human experiment to be in a space like that, right? Like you get to see people in a completely different way than they'll show you other
Absolutely.
places.
How old is too old to be a stripper?
Oh, I don't think there is an age limit. I think it's all about because, well, look for example, Sophia Loren, right? Like she is still hot. I don't even know how old she is. She's got to be in her 80s, but she has that sex appeal, right? Like it's all about how you take care of yourself. It's definitely about your attitude and your mindset, I think, right? Like I definitely expect that I'll be one of those ladies that even in my 80s, like Eartha Kitt too is a really good example. I don't know a guy that would have turned that woman down, right? Like
Yeah.
regardless of her age. So, and there's plenty of young ladies, most of them are out holding protest signs these days that you wouldn't touch the 10-foot pole. So I
Yeah.
don't think age matters at all. I think it's literally all up here, right?
How
It's all
much can
mindset.
a in one shift as a stripper?
Mm. Without doing, like, without
Give me
resorting to
both. Give me
prostitution.
both scenarios. Yeah, give me both scenarios.
um, a really good I'm not a very good hustler, so I was never in the top tier, right? I'm not a very good salesperson. So but I had a friend that she was a pretty good hustler. So if she made it into the VIP room where there was lap dances and she spent her night there, she could walk out with 1,500 bucks maybe. Is a
Mm.
decent night. And I mean, this isn't one of those high end clubs. There's we live close to Toronto, so there's some high end clubs where celebrities go, right? The competition's higher, the expectations are higher, and the pressures are really high in places like that. So I never bothered. But you could go into a place like that, make 3 or 5 grand, no problem, right? But that's just for staying above board. If you start going below board, who knows, right? Like a girl sets her price for that. The club sets the price for the lap dances and the table dances, and the price is the price is the price. But when a girl sets her price for the other things she's willing to do, it could get high, right? Like it depends on the customer, depends on the girl, right? Like there was some big money in the club where I was. They were all really kind of wealthy Italians, right? And they didn't bat an eye dropping 500 grand for a blowjob, right? Or not 500 grand, 500. Ooh, 500 grand would be quite the blowjob,
Yeah.
right? So I've seen money like that change hands, right?
Yeah.
For some of the girls that when you're around, because sometimes a guy would and his buddies would have a table full of girls, right? So you have a couple that are doing their thing, and the rest of us are just drinking and just sort of hanging around. So I've seen money like that change hands for stuff like that. That doesn't surprise me at all. It depends the neighborhood and the club that you're in too, right? Like the clientele matters. There's been plenty of clubs that I wouldn't even set foot in because you don't want a part of that clientele, right? Like I picked a place where the clientele was at least reasonably classy.
Yeah.
So they were the kind where it was fine if they asked for something like that, and I said sorry that I'm not that kind of gal. They handled it with grace, right? They didn't get there wasn't a lot of guys getting hauled out of my club. They were all pretty well behaved. So
Yeah. What time would your shift start? What time would your shift end?
well, that would kind of depend on, that was all me, right? Like I would finish school, go home, and like pick my son up from his babysitter, make him dinner, get ready. Then whenever my babysitter would show up at the house for him, like I'd try to wait until it was almost time for him to go to bed, and then I'd head off. And if I had homework, it would be longer. I'd have to wait until I was done my homework and then go. So it would totally depend on what else I was doing. I wanted to make sure the rest of the stuff in my life was sorted first before I headed off to do that. And those kinds of places don't get a little bit hopping until later on in the evening anyway. Most of those gents have families too, so they'd have dinner with their family and then they'd come out to the strip club to have some drinks with the guys, right? So it was like that. And then I'd stay until it looked like the work was finished, right? Like if the club was still full of people, I wouldn't leave unless I had something. If I had to get up early in the morning, I would leave. But if it was really quiet and didn't seem to be going anywhere, I'd go home and just pick it up another time. So it was widely varied.
All right. So I have to ask this question now. So when you meet your husband,
Yeah.
and you're in the exploration phase of learning about each other, how did you reveal to him that you had done this? What was his reaction? Were you worried about what his reaction would be? I would think that people want to hear about that.
I cheated my way through that. I actually didn't get any of that weird awkward reveal. I got very fortunate because the way we met was I used to be a blogger actually a long time ago. I used to write a political blog. It was anonymous. I had a pen name like I do now, and he was one of my regular readers. And my blog was very much like my Twitter is now, right? But more politics. I was very focused on politics at the time, but a lot of my personal details I would just put out there. My writing style was very much the same way it is now. So I was always very open about who I was then, and he was one of my regular readers. So nothing, excuse me, he got to know me that way first, right? And then so when we met in person, it's almost like he already really knew me, and he'd already decided that he liked the kind of person that I was. So I actually got to short circuit that problem. Right.
Yeah.
Not that it would have been a huge problem. That wouldn't have been something that would have been a problem. I wouldn't have like stressed out over when am I going to tell him, what would I tell him. I've always been a sort of take me or leave me kind of person, right? I've never been very good at artifice. So it means I have less friends.
Yeah. Has he ever patronized strip clubs, or does he patronize strip clubs? Or
No, he is not that kind of person at all. Actually, when I met him, I didn't believe him at first when he told me he'd never been to one. Right? It's just not. But he's like, he says, why would I go and spend money to go home frustrated? Right? Like, because he wouldn't be the kind that would pay a woman to do something for him in the club, right? Like he just found that kind of useless waste of his time and money, right? So he'd never been. He's only been to a strip club once, and it's because I brought him. I dragged him in. I said, no, you gotta try it out. You gotta experience it. And it was not enjoyable for him. He didn't like it. So that's the only time he ever did it. We have frequented, like I was very much into fetish culture as well. So we have frequented a couple of fetish clubs before, and that was more enjoyable for him because we were together, right? So that was something we did together. But it's not the kind of thing that he would do on his own. He's not that kind of person. Like nightclubs were never his thing ever. He's a homebody.
Interesting. Again, like I said, the polarity is quite interesting. How you guys really are different, but you've made it work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, I bring the passion and he brings the serenity, right?
That's
And
great.
now the good thing is now I get to channel all that energy into different pursuits, right? Like we don't go to nightclubs or any of that anymore. Instead, I'll drag them up a mountain, right? Or we'll go and take a dune buggy out on the beach or something, right? So we channel that kind of passion and energy into other things now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Well, how can people find you on the web? Where do you want them to go? Twitter, a website, a blog,
No, Twitter
any?
is basically all I am right now. It's at Ophelia Madsen. Um, that's basically all I have right now. We've just started a YouTube channel. It's not completely finished yet. I will reveal a little bit about it now. I don't have anything to show for it yet, but it's music sharing and reaction videos because we both really love watching YouTube videos, music videos. We always have really good conversations about that. So we really enjoy watching those. So we've decided to give it a shot to do our own. Um, so we've got a couple recorded now. They're just in post production now, and we'll be posting them actually onto our YouTube channel in a couple of days. I'll be revealing that, but I don't currently have anything for that yet. It's still so new.
Well, as I tell all my guests, feel free after I post this on my channel. When people comment, feel free to answer any questions or comment back to the people that make comments.
Mhm.
And if someone asks a question, I will say this for my audience: you watched somebody just now that told the truth about things, and you're going to have some questions. Some of you will have judgment. I know that. But I would ask you to uh, approach this with respect, and this is to my audience, and ask her questions.
Sure.
I want you to answer them, and feel free to be part of that process. So I'm not, I don't necessarily have to be a moderator on all the comments, and I think we're going to get a lot of reactions from this.
Probably, probably. So a lot of your audience is going to have, I think, some things to say about some of that. But the truth is, yeah, it's that I don't have problems answering questions.
Right.
Right? Like there's very little that I've done that I would be ashamed of admitting, right? Like
Yeah.
I tried really hard not to do things that I have to lie about.
Sure.
It's just because there's so much energy it takes to pretend to be somebody else. So for me, it's yeah. I mean, I've had some really unusual, awkward questions sometimes, but those don't bother me, right? Like I'm always been pretty open. I don't have, and there's people that they're just genuinely curious, right? Like, and I,
I'm thinking like, you were naked on a stage. It's like nothing can embarrass you.
no,
You
it's true.
are unembarrassable, right? I mean, what else
Well,
is there?
it's funny because it's not just even that, right? Like that was the beginning of the metamorphosis to, what else what could I possibly have to worry about? But having kids too. The truth is, like, when you show up at work and you find like your kids vomit in your hair, right? When you're going to shake hands with the new president of the company, it's kind of like, there's
Yeah.
almost nothing that can embarrass you after you've survived stuff like that, right? Like I've had some of some of my stories have been like some of them are tragic stories, right? That wasn't even I've had times when my first husband locked me out of our apartment with nothing but my underwear on, right? And I had to spend the night out in that condition, right? Like those are the tragic parts of the metamorphosis. But it all led to a stage where I realized maybe that's not one of those things that matters as much as most people think it does, right? Like I believe in dignity. You get yourself dressed up, right? Like, and you conduct yourself in a way that's dignified. But I also don't treat dignity like chains, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't look at a woman who's got her dress up to here and down to her ankles. And I don't look at that as necessarily a measure of her character like some people do, right? And I don't always decide that a woman whose skirt goes up to here and whose top goes down to here, I don't take that as a measure of her character necessarily either, right? Like those are factors to be sure, but how a person conducts themselves is more important to me than what they're wearing, and probably be a lot because of those things. Because I realize that I see men in three-piece suits do some very undignified things, right? Like clothing doesn't necessarily make you dignified. So
Right. I like it. Life is interesting because people are interesting.
mhm.
Ophelia Madsen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you,
And
George.
maybe a second time, a second session with you would be good, where we talk about femininity and masculinity and the changes that you've seen over the years, and what is the future of the feminine and the masculine. I think that would be a great topic. But thank you for joining me
Yes.
today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a good talk.